Today's lesson is 7.3 and 7.5, which is solving percent problems. So you've learned about fractions, decimals, percents, how to solve for all of those, and now we're going to be applying those to different types of problems. So you should have already gone through the warm-up. Now we're going to go through it together. Number 1 says write as a decimal. So 0.9%, when we change a percent to a decimal, we bring that decimal point 2 to the left. So I'm going to bring that 2 to the left. I have to fill in my 0. So I get 0.009 or 9 thousandths. 113%, remember if you don't see a decimal there, you just add it to the end of your number. I have to move that one 2 to the left, and I get 1.13 or 1 1300. Number 3, writing as a percent, we take 3 divided by 7, and we get 42.857 on and on and on. So I'm just going to write this as 0.42857. I'll stop there. And then to change it to a percent, we have to move it 2 to the right. So we get 42.86%. Number 4, when we're given a decimal, to change it to a percent, we have to move that decimal 2 to the right. So I bump it 2 to the right, I get 76%. Then for 27 over 300, that as a decimal is 0.09 or 9 hundredths. For that, I just have to move my decimal 2 to the right, and we get 9%. Okay, percent proportions. So how this works is you take the part over the whole and set that equal to percent over 100. So we're going to be using proportions again in this chapter. So a couple examples. It says find the percent. 1 is what percent of 5? So 1 is your part, so you plug that in as your part. What percent? We're solving for percent, so that's going to be our x over our p. That always goes over 100, because percent is always over 100. And then it says of 5. So 5 is our whole. And then from there you cross multiply. So you take 5 times x, which is 5x, equals 100 times 1, which is 100. Divide both by 5, and you get x equals 20. Since it's written as x over 100, we know that this is automatically 20%. Okay, the other equation that we're going to use is part equals percent times whole. So you're going to get the same answer if you use this or the proportion equation. This is just another way to write it. So if it says 15 is what percent of 60? Well, our part is 15, and then it's asking for what percent, so that's our p or our x, and then our whole is 60. So I multiply that by 60. You can also just think about it. It says 15 is, which means 15 equals what percent, that's your x, of is multiplication, 60. So x times 60. Now you divide both sides by 60, and you get x equals, and then if you take 15 divided by 60, you get 0.25. The only thing about this equation is that the percent, when you put it in, has to be written as a decimal. And then when it comes out as a decimal, you have to turn it into a percent. So I have to bump the decimal over 2, and I get 25%. Okay, we're going to be practicing both of these equations. So example number 1, it says out of 360 books donated for a book fair, 45 are science fiction. What percent are science fiction? So out of 300 books, that's going to be our whole. The whole goes on the bottom. So we have out of 360. It says 45 are science fiction. That's our part. We're going to put that on the top. Then our ratio over here, well, it's always out of 100. And then we're going to put an x. We're solving for percent. Then you're just going to cross multiply. Take 45 times 100, which is 4,500, equals 360 times x. Divide both sides by 360. You're left with x equals 12.5. That's our x value. It's over 100, so it's automatically written as our percent, so we have 12.5%, which means 12.5% of those books are science fiction. We're going to skip these next two, but I do want to practice writing this as, in the equation for percent equation. So that is part equals percent times whole. So our part, we said, was 45. Our percent, we don't know, that's our x. And our whole number is 360. So then from there, we divide both by 360. And we get 0.125. But since this equation, we enter the percent in as a decimal. When we get a decimal out, we have to change it back to a percent. So we have to move this over 2 to the right, and we get 12.5% our science fiction. So we got the same answer, 2 different equations on how to get there. Number 2, it says this year you earned $484 mowing lawns, which was 125% of last year's earnings. How much money did you earn last year? So whenever I'm given a percent, I like to plug that in right away. So I know it's going to be 125 over 100, because it's percent over 100. Then it says this year you earned 484. How much did you earn last year? So this year is going to be your part. Last year's is going to be your whole. From there, we cross multiply. 125 times x is 125x. 484 times 100 is 48,400. We're going to divide both of these by 125, and we get x equals 387.2. But it's asking us how much money did you earn, so we're going to write that as $387.20. Which, if you earned 125% of last year's, that means you're going to make more than last year's. So if last year's was about $390, it makes sense that this year was $484. It was more than last year's. Okay, example number 4. 5 is what percent of 60? We can use either of our equations, but I'm just going to use percent equations for these. So we have 5 is our part. So 5 is 5 equals what percent? Percent is our x. Of is multiplication, 60. So 5 equals x times 60. Divide both of these by 60. So in your calculator, take 5 divided by 60. And you get 0.083 repeating. Then we have to change that to a percent. We bump that over 2 to the right, and we get 8.3 repeating percent. Number 2, it says, what is 0.2% of 98? So you could use either equation. I'm going to use a percent proportion. So I know that it's 0.2 over 100, percent over 100 equals, we're trying to find the part. We know our whole is 98. So now I'm going to cross multiply. I'm going to take 98 times 0.2, and I get 19.6 equals 100 times x. Divide both sides by 100. And I get 0.196. I'm not changing that to a percent because it's asking me for the number. It's asking me for the part. So it's 196 thousandths. Then the last one, it says 234 is 104% of what number? Okay, let's try using both of the equations. So for a percent equation, we have 234 is our part. 104% is our percent, but we have to put this in as a decimal. So we move the decimal point to the left and we get 1.04. And then we're trying to find of what number, what's our whole. Then we divide both sides by 1.04. And we get x equals 225. We could also solve this using a percent proportion. So we know it's 104 over 100, percent over 100 equals, my part is 234, and I'm solving for my whole number. From there I cross multiply. I take 234 times 104, and I get 24,336 equals 100x. Oops, I messed this up here. 234 is our part, and I put it on the bottom, where the whole should have been. So we raise 234 over x. So now we take 234 times 100. We get 23,400 equals 104 times x. Divide both sides by 104. And we get x equals 225. So we get the same answer both ways that we do it. So both equations work. Okay, MCA practice. Some classmates compare their scores on a recent math test. So we need to figure out which student answered more than 80% correctly. So Molly answered 15 out of every 20 questions correctly. So Molly, her part was 15, the whole was 20. We're trying to figure out the percent over 100. So you take 15 times 100, which is 1,500, equals 20 times x, which is 20x. Divide both by 20. And we get 75 equals x. So Molly was 75%. So we know it's not Molly. Molly did not get more than 80%. Brittany answered 7 out of 8 questions. So we take 7 out of 8 equals x over 100. 8 times x is 8x. 7 times 100, 700. Divide both by 8. And we get x equals 87.5%. So Brittany got more than 80%. Then to just check, 7 out of every 10 is the same as 7/10, which is the same as 70%. So it's not Desiree. And then for Nick, he got 4 out of 5, which is the same as 8 out of 10, which is the same as 80%. But the question is asking for more than 80%. So it's not Nick. So it has to be Brittany. All right, your homework is up on the board. Make sure you copy it down. This is going to be due tomorrow.